The commander spat, useless, flipping through the reports. A race that cannot even defend their own planet. Let them burn. No one argued. The Mazar A species barely capable of interstellar flight had been under attack for weeks. The Zak Consortium, a coalition of brutal war-hungry species, swept through their territories like wildfire. Every species that had once pledged support to the Mazar pulled back when things got tough. Why risk fleets on a race that could not even mount a decent defense? The Galactic Council had been informed. Some urged mercy, others tactical retreats, but the majority ruled. The Mazar were not worth the hassle. All. That is, but one species. Anything from humans? The commander asked, the incredulity in his voice as thick as his accent. The counselor, a Relentless with too many eyes and not enough sense, exhaled a sigh. They're sending aid. Their fleet's already en route. The room was quiet for a moment. The commander simply stared, really perplexed. To them. Why? They've got nothing to offer. They barely have functioning shields. Apparently, they have an agreement with the Mazar. An agreement. The commander laughed and shook his head. No one honors agreements like that anymore. The Relentless looked down at the tablet. It would seem, in fact, that the humans do. From the bridge of the Vanguard, Captain Carlos stared down at the planet below. It was a wasteland of smoke and fire. The Mazar cities flickering dimly in the distance, their defenses falling one after another. Even from space, the planet looked like it was dying. Sir, his first officer said, we're getting reports of Zak ground forces closing in on the capital city. How many civilians left? Too many. If we don't move quickly, they'll be wiped out. Carlos clenched his jaw, watching the tactical display. They were vastly outnumbered, and the Zak ships outgunned them 3-1. But that didn't matter. They hadn't come for an easy fight. They're counting on us, Carlos grumbled. Prepare all strike teams. We're going in. On the ground, the Mazar were barely hanging in. Their makeshift barricades fell before the relentless Zak onslaught. The few Mazar soldiers, as brave as they were, fired what little they had into the ranks of the oncoming invaders. With deadly efficiency, the Zak surged forward, cutting down the Mazar without effort. In the eye of the maelstrom, Mazar leaders huddled together, helpless. Then, from out of nowhere, the sky roared. Shuttles marked with the unmistakable insignia of Earth screamed overhead, and human drop pods, slamming into the ground with the force of meteors, followed. The Zak barely had time to react before the first humans were on them, armored, fast, and shockingly coordinated. Human soldiers hit the ground running, scattering the Zak with precise, brutal attacks. The Mazar could only stare in disbelief at what the humans did in minutes, when they themselves had not been able to accomplish in weeks. Captain Carlos's boots bit into the ashen soil as he hit the ground. His men were moving already, a line that was effortlessly pushing back against the Zak forces. The Mazar capital, what was supposed to be a city of twisted metal and shattered pavement, lay in ruin. Yet there was still time. If they could hold the line, they just might save what was left. Captain, Zak reinforcements are en route, his comms officer reported. Good. Carlos grunted. I was starting to think this was going to be too easy. The Zak were nothing if not relentless. Their hulking forms, twice the size of most humans, barreled forward, their weapons spitting fire. But the humans didn't bat an eyelash. They moved as one, each soldier a cog in a well-oiled machine, cutting down the Zak with brutal precision. The Mazar, huddled behind their shattered barricades, watched in amazement. They had expected death, defeat, the end of their race. Instead, they saw men fighting with a ferocity that was as stunning as it was terrifying. A Mazar leader, shaking, approached Carlos. His alien eyes were wide, his voice trembling. Why? Why did you come? Carlos looked at him, reloading his rifle. We had a deal. A deal. The Mazar leader looked confused, but no one else. We're not everyone else, Carlos said simply. He wheeled back to the battle, signaling his men to push forward. The Zak were relentless, but humans were another thing altogether. They didn't have the numbers, yet neither did they require them. Every human soldier fought for something alone, making sure that with each strike into enemy space, the level of focus unnerved even the Zak commanders. The battle thickened, and with it, Carlos's team pressed deeper into the city. The Zak fell back, but they weren't defeated. The humans might win this battle, but what about the war? That was a different question altogether. "Captain," his first officer said, "we've secured the western flank, but the Zak are reconsolidating." Carlos nodded, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "We need to hold this position. Reinforcements are still hours away." The Mazar leader, still hovering in the vicinity, looked upwards at him. You can't hold them off alone." Carlos gave him a withering glance. "Watch us." The Mazar's leader was at a loss for words. He had expected nothing different from humans than from all the others. Cold, calculating, and uninterested in risking their lives for such a lowly species as the Mazar. Instead, he saw something different. He saw humans who refused to turn their backs whenever things became tough. Humans who fought even when there wasn't an apparent reward. For the first time in days, a shred of hope was lit inside his mind. The human advance was steady but grueling. Every street felt like a new battlefield, every corner concealing more Zak ready to ambush. With every step that Carlos made, the armor clanked, mixing dirt and ash in with the sweat on his brow. Yet he kept going. His men followed without question. "Captain," his comms officer's voice buzzed in his ear. "The Zak are regrouping in industrial sector. They're trying to cut off our escape." Carlos sneered. "Let them try. We're not going anywhere." He signaled for his squad to move ahead, and they pressed deeper through the ruins of the Mazar capital. The fires raged around them, the rumbles of far-off explosions reverberating through the shattered city. Still, though chaos reigned everywhere around them, the humans remained focused. They finally reached the industrial district, a maze of twisted metal and collapsed structures. The Zak had dug in here, heavy artillery poised against a few remaining strongholds in the city. Unless defeated, the capital was sure to fall. Carlos studied the layout. It was definitely a death trap, but they didn't have the luxury of waiting. "We'll hit them hard and fast." No time to second guess. The voice of Carlos came firm, and his men nodded without hesitation. The first salvo fired from the human side was no less than a clap of thunder. Rockets screamed towards positions held by Zak, detonating with brutal efficiency. Zak's soldiers scrambled to return fire, but the humans were already in movement. It was an almost reckless pace that they hit the entrenched enemy lines, tearing through the Zak's entrenched defensive positions as if they were nobody. In the midst of all this action, Carlos's rifle kept barking in his hands, cutting down towering Zak after towering Zak. His men wove through the enemy lines like ghosts, creating chaos wherever they were seen. The Zak fought hard, but it was plain to see they had not expected this level of resistance. Their tactics were based on the overwhelming of their enemies with brute force, but the humans did not play according to such rules. They were quicker, readier, and far stubborner than the Zak had foreseen. A blast went off nearby, shaking the ground beneath Carlos's feet. Stunned, he struggled for balance, but managed to fire another round into the chest of a charging Zak. The alien let out a guttural growl as it collapsed, its giant body hitting the ground with a heavy thud. "Captain," one of his men called out, "they're pulling back." Carlos didn't relax. He knew the Zak weren't running. They were massing, reorganizing for a counteroffensive. He looked up at the horizon where smoke from the city's fires darkened it. They had done very well, but the battle was far from over. "We need to press on," he ordered. "We cannot give them time to reorganize." Humans pressed the advantage, moving swiftly. The deeper they went into the industrial sector, the more intense resistance they faced. Zak's soldiers began to flood the area, pouring out of their bunkers and underground tunnels. It was becoming evident that the Zak had prepared for a long fight here and were throwing everything into it. Carlos's squad huddled together behind a collapsed structure. Huddled down now, the Zak were being deluged with a hail of plasma fire, their heavy artillery making it almost impossible to advance. "We're pinned," one of Carlo's men shouted, ducking as a nearby wall exploded in a burst of dust and debris. Carlo gritted his teeth. They couldn't afford to get bogged down out here, not with the Zak so close to breaking through into the city's last defenses. "Rockets now," Carlo barked. The humans immediately obeyed, launching a new volley of rockets into the Zak's heavily fortified positions. Explosions shook the ground beneath their feet, flinging debris in all directions. The Zak's artillery fire slackened, but not enough to guarantee victory, Carlo knew. "We go in," he said, rising behind cover. His men followed suit without any ado. They charged off into enemy lines, a very risky thing to do. Skirting mounds of rubble, dodging the incoming fire with a precision of movement speaking volumes for calculation, the Zak, despite superiority in numbers, were taken aback by the aggression of the human assault. By the time they reached Zak's stronghold position, the battle became fierce. Humans engaged in a full-on hand-to-hand combat with Zak. Their quickness and agility proved to give them the edge over the larger aliens. The air was thick with the sounds of battle, gunfire and explosions, and the guttural growls of the Zak as they tried vainly to push the human invaders back. Carlo fought alongside his men now, his rifle replaced with a combat blade as he fought the Zak heads-on. He ducked beneath a swing from a huge Zak warrior and drove his blade up into the alien chest. The Zak roared in pain, fell to the ground as Carlo pulled the blade free. A chaotic battle, yet the humans fought with unnerving concentration. Never ceasing, without hesitation, they began to push further ahead. Tostovi grinned as they neared Zak's command post. One of his men, a tall, battle-hardened soldier, Vance, turned to him with a smile. "We've got them on the run, Captain." "Not yet," Carlo said in a low voice. He could see the Zak regrouping out there, preparing for another push. The creatures were tenacious. He would give them that. But so were the humans. "Hold this position," Carlo ordered. "We need to give the Mazar more time." As his men prepared for the next wave, Carlo cast a glance back over his shoulder at the city they were fighting to protect. The Mazar had been left to die by every other species, but not by them. Humans didn't leave their allies behind, no matter how desperate the situation. Carlo's hand tightened on his gun. The Zak weren't done yet, but neither were the humans not by a long shot. The ground shook beneath Carlo's feet as the Zak launched their final assault. From a distance, the waves of the hulking creatures moved with ruthless precision, determined to crush the human resistance once and for all. Their thunderous roars echoed through the ruined streets of the Mazar capital, a chilling sound that echoed down even the most battle-hardened soldier's spine. But Carlo's men didn't budge. "Hold the line," Carlo shouted, standing firm at the front. His voice cut through the chaos with clarity and in a tone of command. "We're not giving them an inch." Bruised and battered by the relentless fighting, the human soldiers dug their heels. They knew what was at stake. The Mazar was a race everyone else had left to fend for themselves. Should they fall here, the entire planet would be wiped out, and the Zak would add another victim to their long list of conquests. The Zak charge was a tidal wave. Plasma fire filled the air, and the ground shook as hulking Zak warriors barreled toward the human line. Carlo's men returned fire, their rifles flashing in the dim light of the burning city. But the Zak were too numerous. For every Zak that fell, two more took its place. "We can't hold them off forever, Captain," Vance yelled, firing off a round into a charging Zak. "We don't need to," Carlo grunted, ducking behind cover as a plasma bolt whizzed past his head. Just long enough. The Mazar had been frantically evacuating their people from the city, getting as many civilians out as they could while the humans were holding the line. Carlo knew the odds were not exactly in their favor, but that didn't matter. The Mazar needed time, and the humans were giving it to them, one bloody street at a time. A blast shook the ground nearby, with detritus flying through the air. Carlo shielded his eyes as dust and smoke filled the space around him. The Zak were closing in, continuous in their onslaught that somehow managed to break through the human defenses. But they didn't stop. With gritted teeth, Carlo motioned for his men to fall back to their secondary position. They moved quickly, falling back enough to regroup, but never giving the Zak too much ground. The humans fought smart, using the wreckage of the city to their advantage, picking off Zak soldiers one by one from fortified positions as they retreated. Carlo's comm buzzed. "Captain," the voice crackled, "evacuation is almost complete. Just a few more minutes." A grim smile tugged at Carlo's lips. A few more minutes in this Hell's Cape felt like an eternity, but it was enough. They could make it, but the Zak had other plans. From within the smoke and fire emerged a monster of a figure, a Zak warlord, easily twice the size of the others, brandishing an enormous energy hammer that crackled with deadly power, and his roar sent shivers even among the bravest of men. "Hold steady," shouted Carlo, but he himself knew it wasn't going to be easy. The warlord charged forward, hammer whirling in circles, with terrifying force. Human soldiers were scrambling out of the way, though even the ground seemed to shudder where he struck. Carlo watched in horror as one of his men flew across the room from a single blow, slamming into a wall with bone-crushing force. "We need heavier firepower," Vance called out, trying to steady his rifle as the warlord advanced. "Rockets now," Carlo called out, eyes fixed intently on the massive figure. A half-dozen rockets streaked out from the human ranks, wailing through the air to slam against the warlord's chest. The detonations shook the battlefield as the smoke began to clear, revealing that the warlord still stood upright, apparently only slightly shaken. Carlo clenched his teeth. "Fine, we do this the hard way." He slung his rifle over his shoulder and drew his combat blade as he signaled his men to follow. Charging resolutely toward the warlord, they weaved their way through the chaos with a determined close. Plasma fire raged around them, the sounds of explosions unending, but their focus did not falter. The warlord swung with bone-shattering power, but the humans were too quick. Carlo ducked beneath the swing, his blade flashing as he drove it into the warlord's side. The huge Zak roared in pain, lashing out with a backhand that sent Carlo staggering, but the damage was done. Vance and the others followed suit, attacking from all sides and driving their blades deep into the warlord's vulnerable spots. It was a desperate combat. The humans were fighting with speed and precision that even the mighty Zak himself could not compete against. In one final, deafening roar, the warlord went down to the ground, his enormous bulk crashing into the rubble. The humans didn't cheer. There was no time for celebration. The Zak forces, upon seeing their leader fall, had begun to retreat, their unstoppable momentum broken for a change. Carlo wiped off the sweat from his brow, catching his breath as he watched the enemy pull back. "Captain," the comm buzzed in his ear, "the last of the civilians are out. We've done it." Carlo nodded. His body was aching from the fight. They'd bought the Mazar enough time. The planet wouldn't fall today. As the Zak retreated, Carlo's men took him in their circle, faces reflecting the mix of exhaustion and grim satisfaction. They had done what no other would. They had stood when every other species had turned away. The Mazar would live another day because they had. The sky was yet dark, due to the smoking remains of the city. Carlo looks over the city in front of him in a ball of fire. "Evacuate the rest of our men. We're pulling out." His men moved quickly, gathering up what they could as they made ready to depart. The Mazar would rebuild, but the humans had their own battles left to fight elsewhere. As Carlo boarded the last shuttle, a surge of pride couldn't help but creep into his chest. They hadn't fought for glory or resources. They had fought because the Mazar had needed them, and nobody else had stepped forward. That was enough. With the shuttle doors closing, the humans were finally leaving behind the broken world, knowing well that they had done what no one else would have.